Moves to questions without notice. Are there any questions? I give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Last week, the Treasury Secretary defended Labor's toxic taxes by saying, quote, "Revenue needs to be raised from somewhere." Will the Prime Minister confirm that Australians will pay $77 billion more tax than they get back?
Order. Order. Members on my left, we don't need the wows or the before anyone. Just here, we're just going to allow everyone to be heard in silence. That includes the Treasurer and the Leader of the Opposition, who's now asked his question, and I shall now give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I can certainly confirm that the legislation that is being debated before the Parliament this week confirms that Labor is the party of aspiration. Labor is the party of home ownership. This legislation does two fundamental things,
Members on my
Mr
left.
Speaker.
The member for Barker. Order. The member for Groom. We are 30 seconds in. There is far too much noise. If this continues, I will be left with no other action early in question time to take action. Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. The first thing that it does is allow an opportunity for young people to get into home ownership. It rebalances the ledger so that young people have an opportunity. And we saw that, Mr Speaker, just on the weekend, where in Bexley a young couple with a baby bought their first home in Bexley on Saturday. All three registered bidders for the auction of the two-bedroom garden villa took part, and all were first home buyers. In Melbourne, in Maribyrnong, Lara Harris from the estate agent said this: the buyers were a young couple from Southbank, sick of apartment living, who had once lived in the area and wanted to come back. The underbidders were also a young first home buyer couple. There's a lot of first home buyers in the market. In Maroubra, Corinne Olsen, the estate agent, spoke about the young family who thought they'd been priced out of a beachside suburb. They won the keys to a three-bedroom house. The winning family, this is Corinne Olsen, the estate agent, the winning family had been looking for a property around Mascot because they didn't think they could afford something close to the water. Well, there they are in South Sydney homeland, Mr Speaker.
Order. Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer? The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, the question was about the $77 billion of additional taxation being imposed on Australians by this government.
The Prime Minister is talking about the tax policy that he was asked about. He's giving some examples. He was asked a specific question regarding the tax policy, so he'll need to make sure his answer is being directly relevant. He won't be able to stray into other topics because he wasn't asked about other topics. So the Prime Minister is being directly relevant with the example that he's given regarding the tax take. The Prime Minister.
And these tax changes are what are rebalancing the market so that young first-home buyers can get a fair crack. And the other thing that these tax cuts are doing—
Order. The Minister for Infrastructure. I can barely hear.
It's a birthday, Mr Speaker. To be fair.
Birthday or not, all the rules apply.
To be fair.
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, the other thing that the legislation is doing is giving Australians a tax cut. Two further measures: the $1,000 automatic tax deduction and the Working Australians tax offset.
Member for Mallee.
So we on this side of the House stand for lower income taxes. On that side of the House, on that side of the House, they stand for higher income taxes.
Order.
And what we saw on the weekend is that they've become what Australia doesn't need, just a cover band. Just a cover band. We don't need a Tony Abbott cover band. A cheaper version. We had the real thing out there on Friday, become national president, that he did 7 interviews yesterday because he knows that this bloke just ain't up to the job.
Order. The member for Fisher interjected 10 times during that answer, so he's going to leave the chamber for 94A. Having continual interjections in one answer is highly disorderly. Non-stop is not acceptable, and everyone gets a fair go, but you can't take the goodwill of the House for granted. We'll hear from the honourable member for Holt.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. How has the Albanese Labor government fought for higher wages, including for minimum wage and award-reliant workers, after a decade of wages being kept deliberately low? Good question.
Good call to the Minister for Employment and the Minister for Workplace Relations.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Holt for that question, but also her lifetime advocacy standing up for low-paid workers. Now, I'm really pleased to inform the House today that the Fair Work Commission has awarded a 4.75% wage increase for the 2.7 million modern award-reliant workers in this country. Now, this represents a real wage increase supporting workers with cost of living. Of course, many of these workers are low-paid, predominantly women, work casually and in industries like retail, healthcare, accommodation and food services. It's been this government that's advocated for these workers to the Commission for an economically sustainable real wage increase, and we welcome the Commission's decision as a win for working Australians. Now, of course, in addition to the 4.75% increase for our award-reliant workers, the Commission has determined to lift the floor for our lowest-paid workers who rely on the national minimum wage by delivering the lowest classifications a 6% wage increase. This decision means that our lowest-paid workers who rely on the national minimum wage will now earn over $1,000 a week. And since this Labor government came into office, the national minimum wage has increased by more than $12,000 per year. This translates to a 12% real wage increase for Australia's lowest-paid workers since we came to government. Now, today's wage increase will deliver meaningful help with cost of living for Australians' lowest-paid workers. And while this government backs pay rises for low-paid workers, those opposite have refused to do so. Shadow Minister after Shadow Minister were out this morning doing the media rounds, and they were asked time and time again, would they deliver or support or back a real wage increase? And none of them had the guts to say just yes. Now, this shouldn't be surprising, though, of course. Not once when they were in government did the Coalition advocate for a real wage increase for Australian workers. And for a decade, those opposite admitted it was a deliberate design feature of their economic architecture to keep wages down. Well, of course, this side of the House supports wage increases. We also support tax cuts for Australians. It's only the Labor Party that's on the side of working Australians.
Call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister confirm that Australians will pay $77 billion more tax than they get back?
Order. Members on my right will cease interjecting. The Treasurer, Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I'll do my best to answer a question that didn't really make sense. That didn't really make sense, Mr. Speaker, but then again,
members on my left.
But then again, it doesn't make sense to oppose income tax cuts. But that is what they have done time after time after time. They oppose income tax cuts, and the other thing that they oppose, Mr. Speaker, is the real wage increases that the minister just spoke about. That 4.75% increase in the minimum wage, that brings the increases for those on minimum wages and awards to $12,000 since we came to office.
Gippsland.
We want Australians to earn more and to keep more of what they earn, which is why consistently we have made submissions to the Fair Work Commission arguing for increases in real wages, something those opposite have never, ever, ever done.
The members on my right, the member for Cunningham, the Leader of the Opposition.
Relevance, Mr Speaker. The question was about Labor's $77 billion of tax increases.
Yes, the Prime Minister was asked a yes-no question around the $77 billion that the opposition is claiming that the government is receiving back. So the Prime Minister, I know you want a yes-no answer, but he's obviously I can't make him do that. So he wasn't asked about other policies than that one. The Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, the question went to how much tax people pay and how much they get back. It worked. That's exactly what was asked.
Yeah.
No. So to the point of order.
Order. We'll get through this.
Just acknowledging the frustration of the Leader of the Opposition. The words that you say into the microphone all form part of the question. And when the words finish with "and what they get back," then the full relationship is able to be answered and is relevant.
So we'll hear the order. We'll hear from the manager.
The point of order, because we want the Prime Minister to try and be relevant. So it was a very tight question about $77 billion. Are you paying more taxes? $77 billion, okay. Yes or no? It's in your budget papers.
All right. Okay, so the question to the Prime Minister, will the Prime Minister confirm that Australians will pay $77 billion more tax than they get back? So it's a figure that he's given, so I'll have to listen carefully to make sure he's talking about what. Yes, thank you, Leader of the Opposition. We're dealing with this, but there's a yes-no that you require. I can't get him to do that, but I can make sure he's being directly relevant about the tax question he was asked about that figure as well. The Prime Minister has the call. The Leader of the Opposition, we're just going to take the temperature down a little bit. There's just far too much noise this week already. I want the House to settle, and we'll hear from the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. We on this side of the House on Thursday will be voting for income tax cuts. Yep. Those on that side will be voting for higher income taxes. Like they did before the last election. Like they did when we changed stage 3 of the tax cuts. Consistently, they have voted for higher taxes and lower wages for working Australians. We on this side of the House stand for working Australians. We stand for higher wages, lower income taxes, and for people to earn more and keep more of what they earn.
The call to the honourable member for Sturt.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to help workers earn more and keep more of what they earn? How does that compare to other approaches?
The call to the Treasurer.
Thanks to the member for Sturt for her question, but also for the very significant role that she plays in our team in her first term, representing a really beautiful part of Adelaide. Mr Speaker, this is a really important week for our economy, with the national accounts coming out tomorrow, and in the context of all of this global economic uncertainty, any growth will be welcome in those figures. Any through-the-year growth with a 2 in front of it would be a welcome outcome. We've got investment booming in the first quarter. We've got exports off quite substantially, and we've got public demand making no contribution to growth in the first quarter. We know that already. We'll see the rest of the numbers tomorrow, Mr Speaker. But this week is also very significant for a couple of other reasons, Mr Speaker. This week and this government is all about higher wages and lower taxes for workers and a fair go for first home buyers, Mr Speaker. And in that context, as the Minister for Employment said, we welcome the Fair Work Commission decision today. This is the pay rise that millions of Australian workers need and deserve. This is the sustainable real wage increase that the Minister and I sought when we made the submission on behalf of the government. And because of this decision, and because of this government, more Australians will be earning more and keeping more of what they earn. Because we're cutting income taxes 5 times in 3 different ways, the average worker will be better off up to $2,800, Mr Speaker. Now, I hear those opposite chirping away, Mr Speaker. They have not changed a bit since they said low wages were a deliberate design feature of their economic policy. They have not learned a thing since the last time the member for Hume told them to vote against tax cuts in this place, Mr Speaker. They don't support pay rises. They don't support tax cuts. They don't support first home buyers, Mr Speaker, and neither does the other part of the three-ring circus over there, Mr Speaker, the One Nation Party. They always vote the way that Gina Rinehart tells them to and not the way that working Australians need them to in this parliament, Mr Speaker. When the country is crying out for change, those opposite cling to a broken status quo which has been locking too many Australians out of housing for too long, Mr Speaker. When they see the legitimate concerns and pressures that people have around this country, they seek to benefit from that politically. We seek to address those legitimate concerns that people have, and that's what the budget is all about. When they look around the world at the social dislocation and political division in other countries, they want to replicate it here, Mr Speaker. We want to avoid it. Their strategy is to talk down the economy, to talk up division in our society and to vote against tax cuts and first home buyers, Mr Speaker. Now, we'll learn more about our economy tomorrow in the national accounts, but we already know that this side supports workers and first home buyers and that side does not.
Order. Before I call the next question, I just want to do a few acknowledgements. I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today is His Excellency Mr Vijay Tahera, the Sri Lankan Minister of Foreign Affairs, Foreign Employment and Tourism. Accompanying His Excellency is Her Excellency Yasojo Gunasekara, the High Commissioner of Sri Lanka to Australia. Also, we are joined today by His Excellency Samrang Boros, the Minister to the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Cambodia. Welcome to Question Time. And I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today is Will Lorenstein, a proud Wathai man from Cape York who completed Year 12 on an Australian Indigenous Education Foundation scholarship, joined the Australian Defence Force and was recently awarded the Royal Australian Air Force Aviator of the Year 2026. Welcome to Will. And I give the call to the honourable member for Indi.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for the Environment. Regional communities host renewable energy projects critical to our energy transition, and they want better engagement from developers for the vital role they play. The Minister has agreed to a national environmental standard on community engagement as part of reforms to the EPBC Act. It's been 6 months, and we've only seen drafts of 2 of the 5 standards. Minister, when will the remaining standards be released for public consultation?
Give the call to the Leader of the House and the Minister representing the Minister for the Environment and the Minister for Water.
Thanks very much, Speaker. And I thank the member for Indi for the question and acknowledge her long-term engagement, both in community consultation generally, but specifically with respect to EPBC reform, and also acknowledge she's raised this issue with me previously in this chamber. At the end of last year, we passed consequential changes to environmental law, but behind the environmental law, a series of standards had to be established to effectively create the impact of those reforms. As the question referred to, there are new national environmental standards and supplementary guidelines to get the system up and running. The consultation period on the first standard, which is on matters of national environmental significance, has just closed. That standard goes to the substance of the Samuel Review in that it sets clear objectives and outcomes for protected matters, including prioritising mitigation. The second standard is the offset standard. That one is still open but closes soon. The standard that's raised in the question is, as well as these standards being out for community consultation itself will have a standard, and I'm advised that work on that is well progressed on the standard, and the government anticipates that it will be released for its consultation in the coming weeks.
Give a call to the honourable member for Bonner.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government making sure Australians can earn more and keep more of what they earn? How does the recent budget help to deliver aspiration for all, not just some? And what are the risks to this approach?
Give a call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the fantastic member for Bonner for the question, and I thank her for her strong advocacy on behalf of working people there in Brisbane. Now, today the Fair Work Commission has made this critical decision, which will assist 3 million workers by giving a 4.75% increase to the minimum wage. Now, this makes lowest paid workers some $12,000 a year better off compared to when we took office just in 2022, making a real difference for real people. This is delivering real change. In this case, a 12% real wage increase over the time in which we have been in office. That stands in stark contrast to the risk of those opposite who argued that low wages was a key feature of their economic architecture. Now, for members on this side of the House, this is good news, because we want Australians to earn more and to keep more of what they earn, with higher wages and with lower income taxes, because our budget delivered another 2 income tax cuts for working Australians. And this week, every single Labor member in this House will vote to deliver them. This takes the number of tax cuts delivered by us in government to 5. 5 income tax cuts, 5 consecutive increases to the minimum wage. Now, what do all those have in common? They were all good for working Australians, and they were all opposed by those opposite, every single measure. They argued against higher wages, they argue against income tax cuts, and they argue against more young people getting a fair crack at getting into the housing market. And this is why Labor is the party of aspiration. We believe in aspiration for all, not just some. We believe that aspiration is about improving your lot in life, not just staying where you are, not just entrenching privilege, but creating the opportunity for every Australian to be their best. The party that backs first home buyers to own their own home. The party that helps Australians earn more and keep more of what they earn, because we do want that aspiration to be available for all. We are delivering real change. Those opposite are just drifting back to the past, where they've made Tony Abbott the president of the Liberal Party, who couldn't make it to 2 years as Prime Minister. That is their vision of looking towards the future.
Order. Call goes to the honourable member for Goldstein.
He did. He actually went to an election.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Over the last 12 months, the Albanese Labor government has taken $410 of extra tax from the average worker through bracket creep, and Labor will continue to rely on it year after year. Can the Treasurer confirm the working Australians' tax offset will be chewed up by bracket creep within a year?
Call to the Treasurer.
Well, Mr Speaker, if anybody's looking for evidence that the member for Goldstein is not the sharpest tool in the shed, how about him asking about tax cuts on a day that their party room decided to vote against tax cuts for 13 million Australian workers, Mr Speaker.
Member for
Of
Solomon.
all the things to ask us about today, Mr Speaker, maybe they could have waited for another day to ask us about Bracket Creek when this side of the House, this week, in the House of Representatives, will be returning Bracket Creek, and that side of the House will be voting to keep Bracket Creek, Mr Speaker. It's almost as if somebody who writes these questions, Mr Speaker, is deliberately setting him up. Because only a few hours ago in the Coalition Party room, that meeting of minds down that end of the building, Mr Speaker, they decided to repeat the same mistake that they made not that long ago, to vote against tax cuts for Australian working people. Well, this side of the House will be voting for tax cuts, won't we? We'll be voting for tax cuts when the...
Order. The member for Solomon will leave the chamber under 94A. Do not interject while people are approaching and use correct titles in this House. The member for Goldstone.
Relevance. The question was specifically about whether the Treasurer could confirm the Working Australians tax offset will be chewed up by Bracket Creek within a year. I know he enjoys just a spraying abuse.
Resume your seat. Resume your seat. Yep. The Treasurer wasn't asked about the opposition's or their policies, so I'm going to bring him back to the question and ask if he continues to talk about the opposition, he'll be sat down. The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I was asked about the Working Australians tax offset. We'll be voting for it and they'll be voting against it, Mr Speaker. That's the decision that was taken today in their party room, Mr Speaker. Now, when it comes to returning Bracket Creep, this is a government which has returned Bracket Creep on 5 occasions using 3 different mechanisms, Mr Speaker. In fact, there'll be another tax cut on the 1st of July, less than a month from now, the same tax cuts that they said that they would repeal, Mr Speaker. And so the difference in here is very clear. A Labor government led by this Prime Minister cutting income taxes again and again and again for millions of Australian workers versus an opposition which votes against tax cuts for Australia's working people. So, Mr Speaker, the point that I'm making about the Working Australians tax offset is because of our efforts, Australians will be getting another tax cut. If they had their way, Australians would be paying higher income taxes, not lower income taxes.
Call to the honourable member for McNamara.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing. Why are the Albanese Labor government's recent housing reforms so important for first home buyers, and are there any risks to this important work?
The call to the Minister for Housing, the Minister for Homelessness and the Minister for Cities.
Thank you so much, Speaker, and I thank the fantastic member for McNamara for his question. And I want to acknowledge the particular leadership role that he's played in this discussion in his role as Special Envoy for Social Housing and Homelessness. Speaker, he understands, as I do, that housing is about so much more than bricks and mortar. This is about security, it's about stability, it's about having the confidence to start a family and put down roots in a community. But, Speaker, for too many Australians right around our country, our broken housing system has pushed these things out of reach. Australians are working harder than ever. They're studying harder, they're saving harder, but a broken housing system will not reward their efforts, Speaker, and we believe it is time for change. Speaker, we want a fairer system. We want a fairer system for first home buyers, to put them on a level playing field with investors and to back them in with our 5% deposit program. We want a fairer system for workers, Speaker, who need and deserve a pay rise. And we want a fairer system for taxpayers who need and deserve the tax cut that our government is about to give them. Now, Speaker, those opposite do not support any of those things. And I want Australians who are watching at home to know something. We see the broken system and we see the pain that this is causing you. We are for change. These people are for the status quo. Speaker, we stand up for opportunity. Those opposites stand up for privilege. Now, Mr Speaker, if Robert Menzies were alive today, he would be absolutely horrified with what he sees when we look at the other side of the chamber. Speaker, he started a political party that was all about ordinary Australians having a stake in their own country. Yet in politics today, Speaker, it is Labor who is standing up for aspiration. It is Labor who is standing up for ordinary people to have stability and certainty and control in their lives. Now, Speaker, when it comes to aspiration, our party has a pretty simple belief. We want Australians to get ahead, and we want them to do it in a home of their own. Our broken housing system is increasingly one where your chance of home ownership depends not on how hard you work, but on the wealth you inherit from your parents. And in our view, that is not Australia at its best. So we're making some hard decisions to change the system, Speaker. We're cutting taxes, we're increasing wages, and we're helping more Australians get into the dream of home ownership. Speaker, that's good for the people that you represent in this parliament. It's good for the people that I represent, Speaker, and on the Labor side of politics, we believe what's good for Australians is what's good for our country.
Call to the honourable member for Flinders.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Can the Treasurer confirm that Labor's toxic tax bills grant him extraordinary powers to slash the $250 tax offset to zero whenever he likes, without taking it back to the Parliament?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Mr Speaker, I wouldn't have given another question to Goldstein either. Now, Mr Speaker, when it comes to the arrangements for... Yeah, you did. You did. When it comes to the arrangements in the tax legislation, I thank the honourable member for her question. When it comes to the tax arrangements in the legislation, what we are proposing is not different to what we've seen when it comes to other tax legislation. Now, I know that there's been yet another beat-up today about this, Mr Speaker, from those who want the broken status quo in housing and tax to continue to lock young people out of housing. But the truth is, the fact is, that it's not unusual for tax laws to work this way or for definitions to be finalised by legislative instrument, and they can be disallowed by the parliament, Mr Speaker. So I'll give you some examples. Under the Howard government, Mr Speaker, the debt equity rules, subordinate rules overriding general allocation of debt or equity status, a similar example. Superannuation valuation rules, governments of both persuasions have done it this way. Foreign investment reform from Prime Minister Morrison led a lot of details and definitions to the subordinate laws. And so, Mr Speaker, it's not unusual for legislation to be progressed in this way. I don't remember governments or treasurers of other political persuasions being subjected to the same sort of feedback about these standard arrangements, Mr Speaker. These standard arrangements, Mr Speaker. You had no problem with it when Mr Howard did it. You had no problem with it when Mr Morrison did it. This is the way that...
The member for Flinders on a point of order. The Leader of the Opposition, one of the members of the House are on their feet. I'll ask you to assist the House just by not interjecting, so I can hear just when you're raising a point of order, everyone's silent. I like that's courtesy to everyone, including the member for Flinders.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. On relevance, I think what the Treasurer is trying to say is just yes.
The member for Flinders, that is not an appropriate. That is an abuse of the standing orders. And if that sort of behaviour continues, I'll be left with no other choice but not to take points of order. We can't have a situation where people jump up and not follow the standing orders and the traditions and conventions of this House. I'm asking all members to uphold the traditions and conventions. So the member for Flinders is now warned. Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The point I'm making is this. Those opposites want to pretend that these are unusual arrangements. They're not. And the reason they want to pretend these are unusual arrangements is because they can't defend their actual position, which is to go to the wall for a broken status quo that locks too many Australians, and particularly too many young Australians, out of the housing market. Now, we know that that's the outcome they seek, Mr Speaker. We know that they want young people locked out of housing. We know that they'll vote against tax cuts, Mr Speaker, and all of this pretending that these are somehow unusual arrangements is designed to avoid coming at the actual objective of this legislation, which is to cut income taxes for workers, to make it easier for first home buyers in the system, to better align the tax treatment of income earned from working and income earned from assets. Now, when it comes to this particular definition, we've made it very clear in the budget papers that investments in new dwellings will be exempt from these changes where the investment genuinely adds to housing supply. We made it clear what that would be, Mr Speaker. That's set out in the budget papers. The legislation provides for these details to be finalised in an instrument, which is a standard approach for these kinds of details in legislation like this.
Give the call to the honourable member for Newcastle.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Assistant Treasurer. How will the Albanese Labor government's new tax reforms deliver a fairer and simpler tax system that supports workers, investments and younger Australians? And why has the government chosen this approach over any others?
Give the call to the Assistant Treasurer and the Minister for Financial Services.
I thank the member for Newcastle for her question. Mr Speaker, the member for Newcastle understands that Australia is built every day by people who get up early, work hard and contribute to their communities. In her electorate, that means workers keeping one of the busiest ports in the world open and running, nurses finishing night shifts, teachers shaping the next generation, truck drivers keeping our economy moving, and families working hard for a better future. Our government believes that if you contribute to this country should work for you. Whether you were born here or came from overseas and chose Australia as your home, if you work hard, pay your taxes and do the right thing, you deserve a fair chance to get ahead. Australians know that too many working people are doing everything right but finding it harder than ever to buy a home and build security for their families. Our tax package is about restoring the balance. The legislation being debated in the House today is pro-worker, pro-aspiration and pro-investment. Our budget puts working Australians first because a home should not be out of reach for the people who keep this country running. We are fixing a system that has made it harder for younger Australians to buy a home and harder for working Australian families to get ahead. Our reforms will deliver a permanent $250 a year tax cut for 13.3 million workers through the new Working Australian Tax Offset. This means that when combined with our other tax cuts, an average Australian worker is expected to be up to $2,800 better off a year by 2028. That's more money in the pockets of families facing rising costs. Our changes to negative gearing and capital gains will also help. These are expected to support around 75,000 Australians into home ownership over the next decade. That's 75,000 individuals and families owning and not renting. That means more families with the security and dignity that comes with living in a home of your own. Our tax reforms are about building a stronger economy, rewarding contribution and ensuring the next generation is not locked out of opportunity. Those on the other side of the chamber are the only people who fail to recognising there is a problem. They are obsessed with taking our country back to the Liberals' failed economic agenda of the 1990s and the disastrous Howard Costello changes of 1999 that created deep structural flaws in our housing system, which have shut too many Australian families out of the market. And they've not yet seen a tax cut, or indeed a minimum wage rise for that matter, that they're not opposed to. We are fixing the mistakes of the past, but those opposite can't seem to let them go. Mr Speaker, our vision is for a tax system that rewards work and supports aspiration. We want more Australians to own their own home, and we want to put more money in their pockets, and that's exactly what this budget delivers.
Call to the honourable member for Capricornia.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing. The government's toxic tax bills do not define what a new build is. If someone builds a new second dwelling on an existing title, is the whole title now considered a new dwelling?
Give the call to the Minister for Housing, the Minister for Homelessness and the Minister
Thank
for
you so
Cities.
much, Speaker. I appreciate the question. A new dwelling is one that genuinely adds new to housing supply.
Order. Order. Give the call to the honourable member for Melbourne.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is for the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How is the Albanese Labor government's plan for cheaper and cleaner energy delivering for Australian households and businesses?
We'll start again. I can't. There's too much noise. We're going to invite the House to settle without the ongoing commentary. Just as everyone gets entitled to a fair go, the member for Melbourne will get a fair go. The member for Melbourne has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is for the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How is the Albanese Labor government's plan for cleaner and cheaper energy delivering for Australian households and businesses? What policies would make energy more expensive?
The call to the Minister for Climate Change and the Minister for Energy.
Well, thank you very much, sir. I appreciate the question from the honourable member for Melbourne, and more importantly, I appreciate the pragmatic approach she brings to climate discussions in this House, calling for climate action, and the positive contribution she's made in her time in this House already, Mr Speaker. Now, last week, Mr Speaker, we saw signs of progress in the government's plans. On Tuesday, we saw the announcement from the energy regulator under the legally obliged release of the default market offer of significant reductions in energy bills across the relevant jurisdictions, Mr Speaker, required to be released under law unless the Minister of the Day signs a law to keep it secret, which I have never done and would never do, but one of my predecessors once did just prior to an election, Mr Speaker. But what it showed was reductions in energy bills from modest 1% to up to 10.7% for residences and up to 20.9% for small businesses, Mr Speaker. We see this as good progress, reducing energy bills by spreading more of the cheapest form of energy through a common-sense plan to roll out renewables backed by batteries across the country, Mr Speaker. And on Friday we also saw, of interest to the honourable member, emissions fall as well. In 2025, electricity emissions down 4%, Mr Speaker, which is good progress. And emissions intensity in our energy system, i.e. the amount of carbon produced per kilowatt, the lowest it has ever been in our country under those figures, Mr Speaker. Now, this is very much a story of batteries, because we know that the impact on energy prices mainly comes from coal and gas, which is expensive in the night time. And what we're doing is transferring a lot of that cheap, renewable energy from the middle of the day to the night through batteries. And this is an Australian story, and one that Australia can be proud of. The fact, Mr Speaker, that Australians have installed 423,717 batteries since 1 July, Mr Speaker, is a global story. 12 gigawatt-hours worth of storage. In Australia, we have seen as much battery capacity added. We've seen 10% of the world's battery capacity added in our country. Only two countries have added more battery capacity than Australia over the last 12 months, the United States and China, and in per capita terms, Australia leads by a long way in terms of battery capacity. And in fact, 30 gigawatt-hours of household battery capacity were added in all of 2025, and we have added 12 gigawatt-hours just since 1 July. Now, the honourable member asked me what would slow all this. Well, a return to the policies of the past would slow all this. I'm grateful, always grateful, to the Shadow Minister when he makes clear, as he did all last week, that he opposes a popular policy like cheaper home batteries. He would prefer to go back to the UNGI scheme, which was the signature scheme of the Leader of the Opposition, underwriting new generation investment, which should have been called, unfortunately, no generation involved. Because we have added 12 gigawatt-hours. You know how much the UNGI scheme added, Mr Speaker? Zero. Not 1 kilowatt-hour. That was one of their...
Concluded. The call to the honourable member for Mayo.
Is to the Minister for Aged Care and Seniors. Greg has motor neuron disease with an expected 12 months left to live. Greg's approved for a level 8 support at home package, but assessed by the department as medium priority, and so is expected to wait much of the rest of his life for his package to arrive. Contact with your ministerial office has been fruitless. Minister, what does it take for a dying person to actually get support at home?
Call to the Minister for Aged Care and the Minister for Seniors.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Mayo for her question, and I thank her for bringing Greg's case to the parliament, and I appreciate the engagement that her office regularly has with mine as we try to work through these issues for constituents, as I do with many members across the parliament. As the member for Mayo's question pertains to, our population is ageing very rapidly, and demand for care is growing very rapidly accordingly. And in some cases, people such as Greg have gone through the assessment process and are still waiting to receive the care that they need. Our government is responding to this challenge. As of the 31st of March, a record 364,723 older Australians have access to an ongoing support at home place, while 100,191 are still waiting for their approved level. Mr Speaker, that's why this financial year alone We're delivering 83,000 additional in-home care places. And we're not stopping there. This budget most recently outlined our plan to deliver another 32,000 places next financial year. These extra packages will continue taking pressure off the national priority system, getting more older people the care that they need more quickly. Once we've rolled out these additional places, by the end of 2026-27, 420,000 older Australians will have access to support at home. That will be almost 3 times the number of older Australians that were receiving care as compared with the Home Care Packages program back in 2020. And, Mr Speaker, our significant investment in additional places is making a difference. Since support at home began on the 1st of November, wait times have come down across high, medium and standard priorities, and every person assessed as urgent continues to receive their funding within a month. Additionally, within the budget, we outlined additional investment to ensure that the prioritisation mechanism within
the Minister will pause. The member for Mayo on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Minister, I actually asked you about Greg, who has motor neuron disease, and he's dying, and he can't get care.
Resume your seat. The Minister did address that part of the question, and he was asked. I did hear him mention the person's name, but if he has any more information regarding the individual case, he can do so. But he was asked about what does it take to get support at home, and he is answering that part of the question and is being directly relevant. I can appreciate the seriousness of the question, and I'll ask the Minister to continue.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I listened to the question very carefully, Member for Mayo, and I can assure you that I have the greatest personal sympathy for Greg and other people that are in the circumstances that he faces. That's why, through this budget, we've attributed some additional funding to look at the prioritisation mechanism of the national priority system to ensure that people get the care that they need. We will continue every single day to work hard to make sure that our aged care system is fit for purpose and that it serves people just like Greg.
From the honourable member for Leichhardt.
My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government. How is the Albanese Labor Government's strategic fleet helping communities like mine access supplies during times of crisis?
Give a call to the Minister for Infrastructure, the Minister for Transport, the Minister for Regional Development and the Minister for Local Government.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the member for Leichhardt for the question, and I want to acknowledge how closely felt it has been in his community. In times of emergency, too often we have seen regional and remote communities in far north Queensland, in Western Australia, in the Northern Territory cut off. With roads and rail up north flooded, communities are often only accessible by sea. It's been a logistical challenge to make sure that those communities get the support and supplies that they need, often having to rely on foreign-flagged vessels and at times our fantastic Defence Force. Last week we eased that challenge. I was thrilled to be in Townsville on Friday to greet ANL Kokoda, our inaugural vessel in Australia's Maritime Strategic Fleet. This large cargo fleet, to be fully Australian flagged and Australian crewed, will strengthen our economic sovereignty and improve our national security. It will be there for Australians in times of need, whether that's natural disasters, supply chain disruptions or times of global uncertainty. It's a commitment we took to the Australian people and we are delivering on it. We are an island nation, heavily reliant on ships for international trade. Despite this, our maritime industry has been declining for decades. The last few months have shown how critical it is that we invest and rebuild on our maritime sector. The ANL Kokoda will provide us with more options in times of crisis and in times of global uncertainty. It will also, importantly, provide a training ground for Australians who want to join the maritime industry with Australian wages and Australian conditions. On Friday, I met Natalie, a young tug engineer, who spoke to me about the opportunities that this would open up for maritime workers like her. Alongside Natalie, members of the ANL executive team, representatives from the Maritime Union of Australia and the maritime industry all together, championing the investment in maritime jobs and skills in something that government, unions and industry are absolutely united on. We are continuing the work to secure the remaining 2 ships for the Strategic Fleet pilot program. We have also established the Maritime Skills and Training Initiative with successful applicants to be announced soon. We're cracking down on wage theft aboard foreign-flagged ships. We're working to promote an increase in Australian-flagged vessels through the Coastal Trading Act review. We're committed to making sure that Australia has the sovereign capability in maritime. The strategic fleet is very much part of that, ensuring that we do have the opportunity for an Australian-flagged vessel, Australian crew, to be able to help out in those times of emergency and in supply chain disruptions. It's only this side of government that is backing our maritime industry with our Australian strategic fleet. We're committed to revitalising the maritime industry and our sovereign capability in that regard.
Call to the honourable member for McPherson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Housing. A secret internal RBA memo says that migration policy is a, and I quote, main way that the government influences the housing market. Now, this government's brought in a record 1.4 million migrants, so isn't it the truth that Labor's migration policies have made it harder?
Order.
The
member will begin. Order. Members on my right, whatever's being across the chamber will cease immediately. I don't know what was being said, but we're not going to have interjections. Just as the member for Melbourne was shown the respect, the member for McPherson is going to be given the same courtesy again, because I couldn't hear the question. So if everyone can just control themselves while questions are being asked on both sides, the House will benefit from that action. The member for McPherson will begin his question again.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Housing. A secret internal RBA memo says that migration policy is a, and I quote, main way that the government influences the housing market. Now, this government's brought in a record 1.4 million migrants, so isn't it the truth that Labor's migration policies have made it harder for Australians, including new Australians, to afford a home?
Call to the Minister for Housing, the Minister for Homelessness and the Minister for Cities.
Thanks so much, Speaker, and could I thank the member for McPherson for his question. It's actually a really important question and I'm glad he's asked it of me. Speaker, migration is a piece of the puzzle here, and that is exactly why our government has acted to bring migration down. This is the detail that seems to get lost with those opposite, Speaker, that migration is now almost half what it reached after its post-COVID high.
Order.
Speaker, now, if I can say really respectfully to those opposite, the main game here is we've got to build more homes for Australians. For 40 years, our country has not been building enough homes, and those opposite can laugh and guffaw and play politics all they like.
Immediately.
Those opposite can laugh and guffaw all they like, Speaker. I encourage them to do it. Opposition's a very frustrating time. I completely understand. But the truth is we've got to take this problem seriously, and the serious answer is that we've got to build, build, build. Now, Speaker, that is why our government has the boldest and most ambitious housing policy that a Commonwealth government has had for 70 years. $47 billion, Speaker, and the main goal and the main gain is building, building, building. And I just say, again respectfully to those opposite, that it takes a little bit of moxie to be coming into this parliament and asking me as Housing Minister questions about the housing crisis that those opposite played a very significant hand in creating for our country. Now, Speaker,
Order. Members on my left, the member was heard in silence to give him respect. I'm asking the same respect shown to the minister as well. It's a two-way street.
Speaker, there's a really simple and inarguable truth here. Had those opposite not sat on the Treasury benches for 9 years doing absolutely nothing about this problem, we would be much better positioned to address it.
Has the minister concluded her answer? Resume your seat for a sec. We'll hear from the manager on a point of order.
Yeah, thanks, Speaker. It goes to relevance. This didn't mention the opposition once, this question. It was about the 1.4 million migrants you've let in. So can you bring the minister back to the question, please?
Order. The Minister for Housing, the Leader of the House.
Just to the point of order, the total figure that they referred to, the biggest year that led to that figure, was entirely under their settings. Entirely under their settings, and therefore
Manager on a point of order.
Speaker, that is an abuse of standing orders. It's not true. You brought them all in.
Your seat. Just as the member for Flinders abused the standing orders, both of you then just abused the standing orders. Order. So if everyone can just follow the standing orders, we won't be put in that position. The manager was correct. The minister wasn't asked about the opposition's policies. She was asked about a figure and the impact that has in regarding a memo that is floating around regarding that topic. So she won't be able to talk about the opposition's policies because she wasn't asked about the opposition policies. The minister has the call.
Thanks so much, Speaker. This is an important piece of the puzzle. Again, I respect that you asked it, but unfortunately the member finds himself in a political party that played a significant role in bringing us to where we are today. And, Speaker, our government is actually standing up and doing something about it.
The minister was going close to defying the Speaker then. We'll just make sure, order. When I say to return to the question, that means return to the question. We'll now hear from the honourable member for Bean.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Skills and Training. How is the Albanese Labor government's Free TAFE program backing Australians into the jobs we need? Is the future of Free TAFE certain?
Give a call to the Minister for Skills and the Minister for Training.
Thanks, Speaker, and thank you to my friend, the member for Bean, for his question. He's a huge supporter of the work this government under this Prime Minister is doing to ensure that Australians can get the skills they want so that we can do the jobs that we need. And in particular, he's a big supporter of Free TAFE. Free TAFE, which has been life-changing for hundreds of thousands of Australians. It's this government saying to Australians that we'll back them to further their training in those critical industries where we need more workers. Now, Speaker, a couple of weeks ago I had the great honour of attending the graduation ceremony of Claydon, who now has her diploma of nursing, thanks to the Albanese government's support of Free TAFE. Now, Caitlin's a legend.
Order.
She's a single mum. She's a Navy veteran. For her, Free TAFE meant that she could follow her dream of becoming a nurse. Caitlin said that getting that backing meant so much to her. She told me that Free TAFE meant less stress on providing for her son's schooling and his after-school activities too, that it means she's been able to start her job at a hospital right here in Canberra, working with her brother without a student debt. Now, Speaker, Caitlin's one of 245,000 Free TAFE course completions. That's in just over 3 years of the program. And, Speaker, there are plenty more to come, as members opposite will be interested to hear. So that's more nurses like Caitlin, more aged care workers and more tradies, Minister O'Neill, to build homes for Australians, something we are passionate about on this side of the House. And that is why the Albanese Labor government has made Free TAFE permanent, because we want to ensure that every Australian can follow their dreams, just like Caitlin did. Sadly, however, we know that not everyone in this place supports Free TAFE. Those opposite voted against making Free TAFE permanent. The Liberals voted no to Free TAFE. The Nationals voted no to Free TAFE. One Nation over there voted no to Free TAFE. Every one of the extreme right-wing parties in this place. And let me tell those opposite, Australians have noticed. When the leader that you act said of Free TAFE, if you don't pay for something, you don't value it, and not a single member opposite said anything, the silence was noticed. And on silence, Speaker, the current leader of the opposition, he hasn't said the word TAFE in this place for more than a decade. More than a decade. Not since his idol and his new boss, Tony Abbott, was Prime Minister. Now, Australians know that only Labor stands with them to get the skills they want so we can get the jobs we need done now and into the future. Labor delivered Free TAFE and Labor will always stand up for Free TAFE and for Australians like Caitlin getting the opportunities that come with it. Aspiration for all, not just for some.
Call to the honourable member for Wentworth.
My question is for the Minister for Communications. The Reverend Tim Costello today described gambling company inducements such as bonus bets and boosted odds as the most evil and predatory feature of the gambling industry. The Murphy Review recommended the immediate banning of all inducements and inducement advertising, but these recommendations are not included in your exposure draft bill. Will the Albanese government act to outlaw these inducements that drive problem gambling?
Give the call to the Honourable Minister for Communications and the Minister for Sport.
I thank the member for her question. Our significant reforms will minimise children's exposure to wagering advertising. They will break the link between sport and gambling, and they will reduce the saturation and the targeting of wagering advertising. The response we tabled was at the first opportunity granted by the parliamentary guidelines. We tabled it through the usual way. And the action we are taking to protect Australians, particularly children and young people, from the harms of gambling was announced by the Prime Minister at the National Press Club. We will deliver a significant package, which we announced there, with measures that will reduce the harm from gambling. The package has been carefully developed with harm minimisation at front of mind to stop the deluge of gambling advertising.
Order. The member for Wentworth on a point of order.
I'm raising a point of order on relevance. The question was specifically about inducements, and that is the question that I'm asking the Minister to answer.
Yes, the question was, will the Albanese government act to outlaw these inducements that drive problem? Whoever's interjecting while I'm dealing with a point of order can cease. The question also contained the statements by the Reverend Tim Costello and also about the Murphy Review recommendations regarding this topic, so the Minister was being directly relevant regarding that part of the Leader of the House.
Yeah, just to the point of order that the question concludes with specific reference about what's included and not included in the exposure draft bills.
Yes, so the Minister is being absolutely directly relevant to that part of the question. If she goes on to other topics, I will draw her back to the question, but at this time she is being directly relevant. The Minister in continuation.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. These reforms are important. The community expects to see them implemented in a timely manner. Stakeholders have been keen to see the detail of the legislation in the exposure draft. We have worked quickly to get that out for consultation. We've announced they'll start from 1 January next year, and we're working to pass that legislation in time for it to start. The member referred to a particular quote about a particular recommendation of 31. We are addressing a significant package of measures across the report's recommendations to reduce harm from gambling. Apart from what I've already addressed, we're going to stop the deluge of gambling advertising, improve enforcement against illegal offshore gambling providers, strengthen BetStop, the National Self-Exclusion Register. We're going to enhance sport integrity and reduce financial crime risks, and we're going to address emerging online gambling products, including banning online keno and cracking down on dodgy lotteries.
Order. Give the call to the honourable member for Banks.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering life-changing cheaper medicines after a decade of cuts and neglect?
Give the call to the Minister for Health and Ageing and the Minister for Disability and the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme.
Thanks, Speaker, and thank you to the member for Banks, not just for the question but for his terrific advocacy for a stronger Medicare in his community. I'm pleased to say the bulk billing rate in his electorate is now just shy of 90% after our record investment, and I know he regularly plugs the benefits as well of cheaper medicines. For 80 years, Mr Speaker, Australians have enjoyed the fruits of one of Labor's great legacies, the PBS, giving them access to the world's best medicines at affordable prices. And since we were elected 4 years ago, Mr Speaker, we've made 450 new or amended listings to the PBS. Just yesterday, I was pleased to announce 2 new listings for blood cancer. We know, Mr Speaker, tragically blood cancer kills more Australians than any other cancer type except lung. And one of those listings, Blincyto, is an amazing new immunotherapy that's going to give great new hope to blood cancer patients. Before yesterday, Mr Speaker, it would have cost them $230,000 for a course of treatment, but now it's available at just PBS prices. We also listed Calquence, Mr Speaker, a daily tablet for patients with a new diagnosis of particular forms of leukemia or lymphoma. Alona Robinson joined me at the Royal Adelaide Hospital yesterday, where she'd received Calquence on a clinical trial. She's a mum of 4, a grandmum of 2, and happily in remission for more than 5 years, Mr Speaker. She told me how excited she was that others would now have access to this terrific life-saving medicine. We think about 1,200 others every single year, Mr Speaker, but before yesterday they'd have been paying $7,000 a month for these tablets. Now they'll just pay PBS prices. And as you know, Mr Speaker, we've been making those PBS prices even cheaper every single year we've been in government. In the past 4 years, Mr Speaker, Australians have now saved almost $3 billion in co-payments at the pharmacy counter, Mr Speaker. Pensioners and concession card holders have received 90 million additional scripts completely free of charge, which previously they'd have had to pay for. And their maximum co-pay of $7.70 has been frozen for the rest of the decade, Mr Speaker. And patients without a concession card would have been paying this year more than $50 for PBS scripts if we hadn't acted. But thanks to this government, they're now paying no more than $25 for their scripts, thanks to the latest cut we announced at the last election. Now, Mr Speaker, these policies are obviously terrific for household budgets at a time of real cost of living pressure, but they also mean that more Australians are now filling the scripts their doctors say are important for their health, building a healthier Australia.
Yeah. Mr Speaker, I ask for further questions placed on the notice paper.